In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to pick the best race for the playstyle that you want in Oblivion Remastered.
Why worry about which race you're going to pick, and why not just pick one that you think looks cool or, isn't a lizard? Well, in Oblivion, it actually has a significant impact on your stats, and certain races are significantly better for certain classes or playstyles, especially in the early game. Later in the game, these racial stat bonuses are less impactful, as every race can improve every skill and attribute to the maximum level. However, some races also possess something called greater powers, and as well as this, they have some significantly impactful magic resistances, which are going to continue to impact your character throughout the game. We'll cover all of this in the video, so if you're interested, stay to the end. Now, rather than just listing the attributes and skill bonuses for each race in order and potentially boring you to death, I'm going to focus on which races are best for which role. Let's start with the most balanced race, which in my opinion is Dunmer, or Dark Elves. Why? Well, basically they have something to offer for all three major playstyles, as well as a generically useful greater power that can be utilised in a number of scenarios. Dunmer start the game with enhanced blunt, blade, marksman and destruction skills, which makes them your best bet if you want to try a bit of each major combat style early on. And by major combat style, I'm basically talking about archery, close combat, and offensive magic. They also have a bonus to athletics, which is useful really for any character, especially early on when you're particularly slow moving. They have a bonus to light armor, which gives them a bit of added survivability, and they also have a bonus to a second school of magic in mysticism. This offers a bit of further survivability in the form of absorb spells, as well as various other utilities.
In terms of their starting attributes, they get a bonus to speed, which, much like athletic skill, is useful for any character. However, they also get a reduction in willpower and personality in return.
Most races start Oblivion with some sort of resistance, and in the case of the Dunmer, this is a 75% resistance to fire, which, considering all the fire damage dealt with in Oblivion Gates, makes it a really good bonus for the main story quest in particular. It's also great if you want to play as a vampire, as one of the downsides of vampirism is actually a weakness to fire. On top of enhancements to skills, attributes and resistances, some races also have greater powers or additional racial benefits available to them. The Dunmer have a greater power called Ancestor Guardian, which is the ability to summon basically a ghost to fight alongside you for 60 seconds. Now, this can be really handy in a number of scenarios, including as a distraction while you escape, or just to give you that extra bit of damage to take down a more challenging enemy. It's worth noting that the Ancestor Guardian actually scales with the player level, so it maintains its usefulness throughout the game. Overall, the Dunmer or Dark Elves feel like a really solid all-rounder, and you can't go too far wrong picking this race. Moving on to some more focused builds, and starting with the Warrior playstyle. One race that absolutely excels for warrior builds is the Red Guards. They have a bonus to blade, blunt and both light and heavy armor, making them ideally suited to getting up close and personal with your enemies. Red Guards also receive a bonus to athletics, and again this is just generically useful for running around in the early game, and particularly so if you're using heavy armor. They also have a 75% resistance to both disease and poison, making them even more durable in certain encounters.
Red Guards start with plus 10 strength and endurance, but also get a minus 10 to intelligence, willpower and personality.
In terms of their greater power, the Red Guards have Adrenaline Rush, which turns them into absolute monsters for 60 seconds. It fortifies their strength, endurance, agility and speed by 50 points, as well as increasing their health by 25 points. This power can only be used once a day, which is the case for all greater powers, but it can be really helpful when you need it. All in all, it's hard to find a better warrior than a Red Guard. That being said, Orcs certainly give Red Guards a run for their money. They have enhanced starting skills in blunt weapons, heavy armor and blocking, as well as armorer and hand-to-hand. This, combined with their plus 10 and plus 5 strength attributes at the start of the game, and a 25% resist to all magic, makes them consistently tanky in all scenarios.
Additionally, Orcs receive a plus 10 increase to their willpower attribute, but they receive minus attribute points in intelligence, speed, personality and agility.
In terms of their greater power, Orcs possess the Berserk ability, which gives a 60-second boost to fatigue, health and stamina, which is really going to help you through those especially tough encounters. You get 200 fatigue points to help you keep swinging and blocking for longer, 50 points in strength which are going to increase your damage, and 20 points in health to give you that extra bit of survivability. As with all greater powers, it can only be used once a day, and there is actually a downside in that your agility is drained by 100 points whilst you're using it, which increases the likelihood that you might get staggered by the enemy. Overall though, orcs are an exceptional choice for warrior playstyles. Moving on to magic builds, and once again you have two contenders for the top spot. Let's start with the Ultima, or High Elves. The Ultima gain a starting bonus to 5 different schools of magic: Alteration, Destruction, Mysticism, Illusion, and Conjuration, as well as a bonus to Alchemy.
They also start with a +10 bonus to their intelligence attribute, making them a particularly powerful magic user from the very beginning of the game. On the negative side, they receive minus points in strength and speed, which isn't too much of a trade-off.
On top of the base skills and attributes, the Ultima also possess a very powerful inbuilt Fortify Magicka effect. This gives them a 100 point to their Magicka, allowing them to cast a greater number of spells before running out of Magicka. In terms of resistances, they have a 75% resist to poison, giving them added survivability in certain scenarios. However, they are overall one of the more delicate races, and this is due to the fact that they're the only race to actually have a weakness to certain types of magic. Specifically, they have a 25% weakness to fire, frost, and shock damage. Ultima sadly don't have a greater power, which I'm sure is a source of great embarrassment for them. But yeah, overall they're a very strong choice for a magic build and potentially the best in the game.
Before we move on to the next best race for magic builds, I want to draw your attention to the magic of a Vress Games YouTube membership, which is actually a really embarrassing segue now I think about it. But anyway, if you subscribe as a YouTube member or in fact as a Patreon, then you get access to bonus video guides, RPG discussion videos, and other RPG related content. There are also some other benefits such as a private Discord channel and even having your name in the credits of my video if you're interested in that kind of thing. You can find the links for both YouTube membership and Patreon membership in the description down below. Anyway, more importantly, back to the video. When it comes to magic builds, the High Elves do have a competitor with the Bretons.
And especially if you're thinking about defensive magic builds. Bretons start the game with enhanced skills in Mysticism, Restoration, Conjuration, Alteration, and Illusion. So while the absence of Destruction means they're not as powerful offensively in the early game as Ultima Mages, they have a solid grounding in most schools of magic. And again, much like the Ultima, they actually receive a bonus to Alchemy as well.
They receive a +10 boost to intelligence and willpower, but also negative stats in agility, speed, and endurance.
The Bretons also receive the Fortify Magicka buff that we talked about with the Ultima, though it's not quite as powerful as the Ultima version, and this one only offers +50 Magicka. However, it's still incredibly useful for a magic-focused character. The Bretons and the Ultima really start to deviate when it comes to their defensive abilities. Bretons actually receive a whopping 50% overall magic resistance, making them incredibly tanky against enemy spellcasters. On top of this, they actually do get a greater power called Dragon Skin, and Dragon Skin offers significant protection against physical damage for 60 seconds. Again, it can only be used once a day, but it can really get you out of some pretty tricky situations. Overall, I feel like this makes Bretons more diverse than the Ultima. Technically, the Ultima are better for pure output because they have that bigger Magicka pool. So you take the decision based on whether you want a more defensive playstyle or not. Moving on to stealth builds, which are in my mind a little less clear cut than combat and magic builds, which are really heavily influenced by the resistances and greater powers available that are going to offer significant longer term benefits. In stealth builds, you could basically take it in two directions. You could focus on the early game stats, particularly sneak, security, blade and marksman, or you might want to ignore the initial stats entirely and go for the stronger, longer term greater powers and resistances, at which point you might even start looking to orcs and redguards, neither of which are really traditionally associated with stealth builds, but both have very strong greater powers in combat situations. However, there is one particular race in my mind that offers both short and long term benefits in the stealth category, and that is the Khajiit. Khajiit start with bonuses to all of the major stealth-based skills outside of marksman, and you can see my second recommendation for that. They begin the game with a bonus to sneak, security, blade, light armor, athletics, and acrobatics, ideal for a stealth build. Aside from that, they also have increased ability in hand-to-hand.
In terms of their attributes, they are once again pretty suited to stealth builds with a +10 bonus to agility. In terms of negative attributes, they take a hit to willpower and endurance.
When it comes to resistances, the Khajiit are one of the only two races that don't actually have any. However, they do get a greater power called Eye of Fear, and what this does is it demoralises an enemy up to level 25 for 30 seconds, and this is a greater power, it can only be used once a day. Probably more interestingly, they also possess a lesser power called Eye of Night, that allows them to see in the dark for 30 seconds, and this one comes in pretty handy when you're sneaking around at night as either a thief or an assassin, and it's not limited to once per day because it's not a greater power. This combination of skills, attributes, and the Eye of Night ability make Khajiit a very strong overall choice for a stealth character. My second stealth recommendation feels a bit more like an honourable mention in relation to ranged stealth builds, and more specifically for people who want to play a stealth archer who's as strong as possible from the very beginning without worrying about their longer term ability. If that's the case for you, then the best choice in this scenario is the Bosmer. My primary reason for this recommendation is the fact that the Bosmer are the only race who start with bonuses to both sneak and marksman skills. This makes them instantly the strongest stealth archers in the early game. In addition to this, they benefit from improved acrobatics and light armor, both of which have a value to a stealth build, as well as alchemy and alteration, both offering some broader utility.
The Bosmer gain plus 10 agility and speed in terms of their starting attributes, giving them a very strong initial edge in the stealth category. In terms of negative stats, they're penalised on strength and willpower as well as personality.
The Bosmer also have a 75 resistance to disease, giving them a bit of added survivability in certain scenarios. However, the Bosmer do have one pretty significant long-term weakness, and that's their very lackluster greater power. The Beast Tongue power allows them to command a creature once per day for 60 seconds, which sounds great, but sadly it only works on creatures up to level 5 and it doesn't scale. And while it's strong in the early game, it quickly becomes pretty useless. So overall, the Bosmer are a great choice for Stealth Archer early in the game, but later on the benefits start to erode pretty quickly. Whether you pick them for your Stealth Archer build really depends on what you value more. As we moved into the final section, I've really tried to avoid calling the remaining races the worst races. Instead, I've gone for niche builds in order to try and be a bit more diplomatic. I think this is fair because in theory there are some things they're better at. However, those things are more secondary to the core combat of the game, in my opinion. The reality is, for the 3 core playstyles that we've focused on in this video, they're just weaker than the other options. Let's start with the Argonians, who are a decent stealth race. They're just not as good as the Khajiit in the longer term. They start with a bonus to Athletics, Security and Blade, all of which are valuable stealth skills. And they also offer some diversity due to the additional bonuses that they get in Alchemy, Hand-to-Hand, Illusion and Mysticism.
Argonian starting attributes lean mostly towards stealth, with plus 10 to both agility and speed, with their negative points going into endurance, personality and willpower.
In terms of resistances, Argonians are actually pretty strong in certain scenarios, as they've got a 75% resistance to disease, and they actually have total immunity to poison damage. Sadly, Argonians are another race who don't possess a greater power, though they can breathe underwater as a small consolation. But to be honest, that doesn't have a huge impact on gameplay, especially compared to some of the other powers available. Like I said, there's nothing really wrong with Argonians, unless you don't like lizards for some reason, but there are just better choices in all categories. It's a similar story for the Nords. They're perfectly decent warriors, they're just not as strong as the Red Guards or the Orcs. They start with solid warrior-based skills enhancements including Blade, Blunt, Heavy Armour and Block, as well as some added survivability from increased skills in Restoration and some bonus utility from Armourer.
They also benefit from a strong initial attribute bonus in the form of plus 10 to strength and endurance, with negative attributes consisting of minus intelligence, personality and willpower.
Unsurprisingly, Nords have a resistance to frost at 50%, and they benefit from 2 greater powers. The first is Nordic Frost, which is basically just a frost-based damage ability, and the second is Woad, a 30% shield that lasts for 60 seconds. Again, in summary, perfectly good, just not as good as the other warrior races. Finally, we arrive at the Imperials, apparently a bit of a jack of all trades and arguably the master of one, though it's not really one that I can get too excited about. Imperials start with bonuses to Mercantile and Speechcraft, as well as a bonus to Heavy Armour and minor bonuses to Blade, Blunt and Hand-to-Hand.
On top of this, they gain a starting bonus of plus 10 to their personality attribute, with them taking a hit to agility and willpower on the negative side.
Which kind of makes their niche haggling and persuading NPCs, which to be honest is pretty unexciting unless you're going for a very, very particular playstyle. They're also the second race in the game that don't have any resistances, so there's not really any benefit to be had there either. They do have 2 greater powers like the Nords, but even one of those is focused on NPC interaction. The Voice of the Emperor power basically improves your disposition with the NPC you cast it on for 30 seconds by effectively charming them. And the second power is called the Star of the West, and that allows you to absorb 100 points of fatigue from an enemy, which to be fair can actually be pretty useful in some combat situations where you're running low on fatigue and you might be at risk of dying because you can't block, for example. However, overall I really can't see a scenario in which I would pick or recommend Imperials over the other options. Sorry Imperials.
Anyway, if you found this information useful, then maybe consider subscribing for more Oblivion content, and as I already mentioned, I also offer bonus guides and other RPG related videos through Patreon and YouTube membership as well. So check that out by following the links in the description down below, and as always, thank you for watching and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.